There are two types of people in Honkai Star Rail, the waifu lovers and the husbando lovers. If you like both, then I'm so sorry, your wallet is the one that suffers for you. But in this video, we're going to be talking about who is the better investment. Is it Black Swan? Is it Imbibitor Lunae? Both of them are kind of similar because they are like DPS in nature that will help you carry your account to greater heights. For the majority of the video, we're going to be talking about these two characters in a non-biased fashion. And if you guys want my own biased personal opinions, I'll leave it all the way to the end. That's a promise that I always do in these kind of investment videos too. The nice part about this is if you like waifus or you're a waifu collector for your account, the characters that work really well with Black Swan is like another limited character like Kafka, who's in the similar camp, right, the waifu camp. And if you are a person like husbando or you like very cool characters, in my opinion, like Imbibitor Lunae is very, very nice for that. You could even pair together with like Luota, you can pair with Dr. Ratio and stuff. But in my honest opinion, the current character that works really well with him out of all of the characters in the game is Sparkle. So if we see here, they are more or less tied, Black Swan and Imbibitor Lunae. Both of them, their best comms revolve around one special unit that's also a limited 5-star character, which is not very cheap since they are both back-to-back. Like Imbibitor Lunae and Sparkle is back-to-back. Kafka as well as Black Swan is back-to-back, especially if you weren't a player playing in the earlier versions of like 1.2, 1.4 and stuff like that. So that is the comparison. Between the two, currently, I think that the options for Imbibitor Lunae is much higher if you don't have Black Swan, I mean Sparkle, compared to Black Swan if you don't have Kafka. Kafka really does give a lot of value to Black Swan. So if you're thinking of like both of them, I think that Imbibitor Lunae is slightly more affordable to build if you can't fork out like two limited characters right away. That is my opinion of the current value between both of them as well. Next up, or rather, if you don't run Sparkle, who can you run for Imbibitor Lunae? You can run like Tingyun, who is like a 4-star option. She's pretty strong as well. She's generally skill point positive, which helps out Imbibitor Lunae. You could possibly run a character like Ranmei, who's also net positive, or Hanya if you really needed the extra skill points in a double like harmony kind of team together with a hyper carry Imbibitor Lunae. Last slot like a healer that gives some skill points will be pretty good. So he does have his options if you don't have Sparkle. Whereas unlike Black Swan, if you don't have Kafka, your team compositions, you probably will be either running Black Swan as like a supportive Black Swan. And if you guys don't know like how those teams work, check out our Black Swan team composition video. We touch more about playing Black Swan in various roles if you don't have Kafka, or even if you have Kafka and stuff like that. If you want to play her as like the same the DOT DPS, you likely will be wanting to run with a lot of the other characters like Sampo, like Gui Naifen, Esther and stuff like that, which doesn't allow her pop off as much because Kafka does pop DOTs without relying on the enemies to move themselves too. So that is current value, how I think about both of them in terms of the situation of the amount of resources it takes. If we talk about current meta, like if we were to put both of them side by side, I think that Imbibitor Lunae fares slightly better in the current landscape compared to Black Swan. They are relatively strong on their own if you have their best teams and stuff like that. The reason why Imbibitor Lunae is like slightly not as good as a character like Jingliu for now, before we of course see the Sparkle coming into the mix, is Jingliu is much more versatile. Imbibitor Lunae is not as versatile unless Sparkle comes into the mix. You can run a double DPS with Jingliu, but Imbibitor Lunae you can't really do so. Black Swan can be run as a support, can be run as a main DPS, doesn't have to be played hyper carry. So your options for Black Swan is slightly higher than Imbibitor Lunae. But once Sparkle comes about, I think Imbibitor Lunae will be kicked back into the upper echelons of the meta, given that his main downside of being skill point super high skill point requirement and like desperate for skill points is more or less mitigated, allowing him to play into maybe even double DPS teams. So his real downsides are gone. I think that is my opinion. Current value, Imbibitor Lunae probably ranks slightly higher if you're looking for a hyper carry kind of style. If you're looking for versatility, I think probably Black Swan is likely going to offer you a lot more versatility, and that is the current value analysis. Let's talk. Another thing that's also currently, of course, we want to know, sorry, that's the future one. This is the alternatives here. I got mixed up in the order, but we're going to be talking about alternatives. If you don't run, if let's say you don't pull for a character like Imbibitor Lunae, who else is similar to him? There are a few things about similarities, right? Alternatives. You have one is the hyper carries, which I would consider characters like Jingliu with like destruction, AoE hitting, hits a lot of enemies, generally wants to play in hyper carry kind of style. I think his closest competition in Imbibitor Lunae is Jingliu. That is like the biggest competition. If you have a character like Xinglu, the question is, why would you want to play Imbibitor Lunae if you have maybe like, unless you want to like play each one on one side and run like a double hyper carry team, which is quite expensive to run. In the imaginary category, because that is the other thing that people will be considering if you want to pull on Imbibitor Lunae just for imaginary damage, most of us already have a doctor ratio for free in terms of the imaginary camp. So if you're looking for bursting down the imaginary damage, is Imbibitor Lunae really necessary? I am not too sure about that. He does a lot in his kit in terms of damage and combining the imaginary element all in one, but as you guys kinda can tell, imaginary is not too great for break effect damage, which means that you are really specifically relying on like crit rate, crit damage for a character, imaginary character like Imbibitor Lunae. Unlike other characters in the game, like even Huynh for example, you can even run some sort of break effect to get a bit of versatility there. So I think the competition for Imbibitor Lunae is pretty stiff. The reason why a lot of people are pulling for Sparkle is to maintain or help Imbibitor Lunae get better, but the longevity in terms of why you want to pull for Sparkle is in case in future Hoyoverse releases another very strong skill point hungry character, at least Sparkle hedges out that deficit. That is why I think that Sparkle is probably a good pull, as we talk about in the better investment video for Sparkle already. If any of you are interested, check that out as well. We talk about more insights on these characters. But now let's go on to the other side, which is Black Swan. In terms of alternatives, if you're looking for DOT application, you have tons, right? You have characters like Sampo, you have characters like Gui Naifen. All of these characters apply DOT. You even have Kafka, who all offer DOT. But the benefit of the beautiful thing about DOT teams is you generally need more than one sources of DOT damage. The minimum I would say like currently that works in the meta is probably around 2 DOT characters, which is why you see a very common combination of like Black Swan together with Kafka and 2 flexible slots at the end. But you could of course run a triple, for example, like a triple here is like Black Swan's Arcana, and then you have Kafka's Lightning and you have Gui Naifen's Fire, for example. They combo super well with each other and each of them buff each other, helping everyone do more damage. And alternatives for DOT teams is not really an alternative, it's more like the more DOT characters there are, the more synergies they do as long as they contribute differently in each way. Black Swan, in my opinion, is a very versatile DOT character because not only does she pop massive amounts of damage with her Arcana stacks if you build the team around her to get the enemies moving and stuff, she counters faster moving enemies. If you notice right now in like the Panacony, all the monsters seem to have some sort of like action in advance in one of their kits, so you push them faster, they get more pops of Arcana. Even the minimal stacks is like probably 10k of damage for a mediocre build Black Swan. So she counters faster moving enemies. Kafka combines with her to be able to hedge that risk of slower moving enemies, and Kafka just forces the pops on its own. At the same time, Black Swan offers a lot of defense shredding, which then comes into the second category of competition, which is like your Pella, which is like your Silver Wolf kind of debuffers. Of course, these two like defense breakers, Pella and Silver Wolf, do way much more defense breaking. Like I think the amount of defense breaking Black Swan does in her skill is like half that of Pella as well as Silver Wolf. But still, considering that you have it part of a kit, and you also have some kind of damage amp in her overall abilities when the enemies are moving, I think it's with an ultimate ability for Black Swan. When the enemies move, they take more damage, helping you basically like she's like a bridge between Sampo, Gui Naifen as well as defense breakers, filling a very, very unique niche to even be a supportive DOT character. That's why you see a lot of people running, for example, Black Swan in a supportive role with a character that skills with DOT, for example, like or skills with debuffs on enemy like Dr. Ratio as the main DPS and stuff like that. She does offer a lot in her overall kit. She does compete in a lot of fields also because of that, but as mentioned, I think it's a very, very nice mix of overall situation that she fits in. In my opinion, alternatives wise, she probably ranks ahead of Imbibitor Lunae. Unless, of course, you want all the things in one, like you want imaginary, you want destruction, you want hyper carry, you want to play with Sparkle, you really like his design, then I would think, of course, Imbibitor Lunae is the perfect mix of all of them. Otherwise, you can find parts and pieces of what you like about Imbibitor Lunae in a lot of the other characters in the game as well. So that is for the alternatives category, which wraps up our current situation of these two characters. What is more interesting, of course, is talking about which is future value. I think future value is very, very important for these two characters because you don't want to just buy something that is like the flashiest new iPhone and then you know that, oh, Samsung is going to release a new phone just several months later. You want your characters and the money that you spend to have longevity. You don't just want to waste your money on things that just are flashy now in the moment. So let's talk a bit about these two characters in terms of how they scale with time. Let's talk about a character like Imbibitor Lunae first. He's of course a lot more simpler to explain since he has been around for a while more. Future value, definitely we see, I would consider like Sparkle as current value, even though he's not out as of time of recording, or Sparkle's not out as of time of recording, but we know this as a certainty that Sparkle's coming out. We know her kit. She works very well with Imbibitor Lunae, so he is definitely going to go up in value by a lot. I think he'll be back in the echelons of like Jingliu and stuff like that, clearing very, very quickly. His value just increases tremendously because you can run here as like a double DPS kind of roster, as we mentioned already. But moving forward, like going forward into the future, will Imbibitor Lunae still be as relevant as other characters? I am not sure where the game is going, but it seems like what is being done is a lot of break effect is being introduced in the game. You have sets that introduce break effect. You have a character that allows skill point hungry characters to pop off, like Sparkle, who, for example, like Qingxue, Imbibitor Lunae, these characters that drink skill points, they start to come more into the mix, which kind of signals in the future that we might have other skill point hungry characters being introduced in the game, or more break effect characters being introduced in the game, given by how things are introduced in 2.0. If those two things that I mentioned don't work very well with Imbibitor Lunae, if you have other skill point hungry characters coming to the game, for example like Qingxue being added into the game, these two don't work very well together even if you have Sparkle on the same team, because simply you do not have the amount of battery to battery both of them. So the more skill point hungry characters that come into the game, the harder it is for Imbibitor Lunae to find a proper double DPS comp, since they all fight for the same resource as well. So that is one of the caveats, which I think is how the game is going to go, especially if they want Sparkle to sell well. Second thing, break effect. If you have characters that are introduced in the game, they get buffing, break effect. For example, you have Ruanmei, you have the new sets in the game, the supportive sets that buff break effect. It seems like maybe the game wants to scale off a little bit in future with these kind of break effect stuff. In that sense, imaginary damage doesn't really benefit too well from break effect. For those of you who don't know what imaginary does at higher break effects, check out our video. We experiment from like 0 break effect for imaginary characters all the way to like 150 plus break effect, and I'll actually show you what is the difference. Thus, just to give you a quick teaser spoiler, the speed down isn't affected at all, and you will only notice certain things. But check the video out if you're more interested. Either way, none of these two really work well for Imbibitor Lunae, and that's why I think his future value is not as great as a character like a more flexible character like Black Swan. And let me share with you my reasons why. If you have a new character coming out, like the two topics that we talked about, which is like new skill point hungry characters, Black Swan doesn't really care too much about that. She can use her skill once, debuff all the enemies with the defense breaking. It lasts 3 turns. She basic attacks the last 2. Generally skill point positive, doesn't take up too much skill points. You can fit in even Imbibitor Lunae in the first slot and like a second slot. For example, Black Swan, I think it works fine as well. If you need like a pseudo defense shredder, a bit of some DPS coming from your defense shredder as well, I think Black Swan is flexible in that sense. So new skill point hungry characters, Black Swan works fine. Break effect, Black Swan might not benefit too much from because she doesn't offer that much break effect, but she still doesn't not want it. She doesn't mind having the additional break effect as well. Why I say that is because if you realize her overall kit doesn't offer too much wind break damage on the bar, and that is something worth considering. A lot of her damage comes from the Arcana stacks that she procs as well. And another thing that I think Black Swan does that she counters is if we have fast moving characters in the game. So 2 more things that I want to talk about now that we finished the 2 easier ones, which is new characters that consume skill point, new characters that consumes break effect. I want to talk about the second thing, which is a bit more subjective. I would say that's why I put it in the potential category. It may or may not happen, given what we are seeing. I think that speed characters or enemies that come into the game which are faster, they have self-action advance, they move very, very quickly, benefit Black Swan a lot more compared to other characters in the game. So right now we don't have units that like move super fast, push themselves up, take millions of actions every cycle and stuff like that. Black Swan is a kind of a counter to enemies moving faster, which means that if enemies take 2 turns, you will pop the Arcana twice, and so on and so forth, like 3 turns, 4 turns. Where she does fall behind is if you have a need to slow down the enemies. If there's like a way that you can nerf these characters in future is if you need a character like Welt to slow the enemies down, you won't be able to proc Arcana that quickly without a character like Kafka who pops DOT. So Black Swan is an indirect addressing faster moving enemies, but also works very poorly if enemies move very slowly. In a perma slow comp, perma freeze comp that enemies take no actions, maybe not perma freeze but more like perma slow, Black Swan likely will feel the impact quite a bit. Right now, a lot of us don't feel it because if you realize in the pure fiction, in Memory of Chaos, all the enemies have some sort of way to push themselves up, and that is why Black Swan looks a little bit better right now in version 2.0 than she would in a totally neutral environment, and that is something I want to talk about. Imbibitor Lunae doesn't suffer from this aspect. He doesn't really care whether enemies move fast or not. In fact, the faster the enemy moves, maybe hits him a bit more, he gets a bit more energy back to use his ult. But other than that, he's really very neutral in that aspect. So that is the first part on enemies moving faster. The second part that I want to talk about is double DPS teams and moving forward, splitting more DPSs. This becomes in the potential section because it's a bit of fluff / understanding Hoyoverse as a company. If right now, is it better to sell you hyper carries, or is it better to force you to play many different characters, DPS characters, slipping on my words here, in the same team? Let's say I am the Hoyoverse. I have sold you a character like Imbibitor Lunae. I have sold you a character like Jingliu. Both very fantastic characters. If I sell you another new character that does exactly the same as them, but maybe with the fire element, you might pick it up, but eventually once you have all 7 different elements, I'm done selling you characters. Unless I power creep the old characters, I cannot make any more money from you. So logically speaking, the best way, like the second tier, and since we are like in Panacony 2.0, right? So a new change of mindset needs to be done. That's why we will start to see more double DPS comps, where you have characters, for example, like Blade and Jingliu, who work extremely well together, synergetic, and they are both expensive characters. You need to pay money for them. So you have to build like 1, 2, 3, these kind of like triple combo, very nice comps that cost a lot of money to hit like the best meta teams. Moving forward, I think Hoyoverse will like to do more of this. It sells better, it makes more money for them in the long run for double DPSs with synergies with each other. And of course, later on, we can scale on to like triple DPSs and stuff. And the team compositions that are best for that are DOT characters, because you can have one Black Swan here, you can have one Kafka here, and maybe a 5-star Kuei Nai for an equivalent, and these works very nicely. You have like a triple DPS here, so it's very expensive, and you can even like put in a 4th, like a Ho, for example, or even maybe sell like a DOT specific sustain unit. And that would be like super good money value for them. And that is why I think that out of all of the characters in the game, as mentioned in the other section, Black Swan likely will scale better with time, since she is flexible enough to be put in sub DPS. She can play into like multiple DPS comps. Doesn't matter whether new units come out skill point hungry or not. She has debuffs that are coming to the game, which is another thing that I think is going to become more popular, given the set that we see also scales with debuffs. Whereas Imbibitor Lunae is falling behind. Imbibitor Lunae is a great character, but falls in a select time where you are trying to sell the old meta characters, where you're selling hyper carries, which don't make too much money at the end of the day, because DPS is much better found in multiple comps to make more money for the company as well. So that is a lot of talk of discussing. At the end of the day, is what you feel like doing, but these are my opinions and analysis for you guys, just helping you give like more things to consider as you're making your own buying decisions. That's what this video is aimed to do. Whether it's 100% correct or whether I'm super accurate, that is the secondary thing. Ultimately, just giving you more information to help. And if you're finding value in this video so far, before we head into the last section, do give us a like, subscribe for more of such future content if you appreciate such videos too. It does take me quite a lot of time to prepare. The last thing that I want to talk about is free-to-play kit. It makes no sense comparing two characters if one of them requires their signature light cone, E6 and whatnot, whereas the other one can work, for example, at E0, like either one of them. So this is what this section is about, comparing apple to apple, how each of these characters perform at very low investment. As mentioned already, like Their best characters, Sparkle and Kafka, both of them work really well with them, but Imbibitor Lunae is a little bit cheaper because he doesn't fully depend on Sparkle. You could get by with like 4-star supports like Tingyun, like Hanya if you really needed to get by in terms of his skill point requirements generally. So for the pet character, I would say Imbibitor Lunae ages out in terms of being cheaper. Whereas if you're talking about free-to-play light cones, I would say that Black Swan slightly ages out over Imbibitor Lunae. Imbibitor Lunae is a DPS that skills with crit rate, crit damage, since Break Effect is like totally not his expertise, and he's like a main DPS kind of thing. Main DPSs that don't have their signature, you will notice are significantly weaker than sub DPSs, like I would say Black Swan, like could be a main DPS, could be a sub DPS. Without their signature, Black Swan is still quite usable, but Imbibitor Lunae does feel significantly weaker if it's not for the fact that he has his signature light cone. So that is like something to consider as well. Of course, there are many other options now, especially in Panacony. You have so many crit rate, crit damage, destruction light cones being added into the game. I think those are good options as well. But overall, I think that Black Swan is much better. She has many options, many play styles. There's even the free one that has just been introduced is Showtime. We talked about it in our free-to-play video, which is on the channel already for Black Swan. Super good for her. I think it's also very, very cheap for her as well. So in terms of free-to-play, I would say Black Swan slightly ages out if you are trying to make Black Swan usable. If you want Black Swan to be like top tier in terms of reaching like the Jingliu, Imbibitor Lunae kind of DPS as a main DPS, I would say she's very expensive to build. To reach the echelons of like the whale territory, you do need a lot more Eidolons, a lot more superimposition for her in order to see her truly pop off. But if you don't care about like maximum PP damage to compare with the whales, I think Imbibitor Lunae is much easier to reach. If you just want a character that can help you get a lot of damage very quickly, he's cheaper to like reach those damage thresholds currently as of version 2.0. Overall, I think I'm like kind of torn between both of them because this one is a hyper carry, and this one is more like a mix. If you are talking about just getting by, I think Black Swan gets by better. But if you're talking about clearing the MOC 12 for the first time, I think Imbibitor Lunae is much cheaper to help you get that first MOC 12 clear. And that is my personal opinion of this category. And last but not least, of course, let's move this aside, and this is where I start to give you my biased opinion. We talked about a lot in both categories already, and who do I think is the better investment? I think if you are a person looking at this category right now, thinking which is a better DPS, you're likely a relatively new player. If you are a new player, I would recommend you go with Imbibitor Lunae over Black Swan, simply because Black Swan does require multiple characters to pop off. It does require you to have resources spread out over 3 characters. Imbibitor Lunae, you can slap all your gear into one guy. You have some supports who are like totally weak build and still can at least clear MOC 10 in a short period of time, thereby getting you a bit of refund on that Stellar Jits, and you can always pull her, Black Swan, in a rerun. What we know is that the first rerun is kind of like usually 6 months from when the banner is released, so you can expect that for Black Swan, but the second rerun is very, very unknown. And if you're a new player, you really like Imbibitor Lunae, don't let all the other hype fool you. I would say that Imbibitor Lunae will be my recommendation for a newer player. If you are a player who is like slightly longer in the game, maybe you already have Jingliu in your account, in that case, you probably would find Imbibitor Lunae's playstyle more or less muted if you don't have Sparkle, you're not planning to pull for Sparkle. In that case, I think Black Swan will offer you a much more refreshing mix to get into the DOT aspect. Even if you don't have Kafka, you can start to learn a bit more about DOT. You have a good flexible unit that can be eventually played into many different comps in future, and also scales with what is coming, which I think how the meta is going to shift. And that's my opinion, at least for new players and experienced players, for the longevity of your game. If you appreciate such content, like, subscribe. We do this every single patch for as many characters as we can, and see you guys in the next video.